Hello, I'm Alexandra Munroe, Senior Curator and Director, Curatorial Affairs, Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel, Making the Local. I want to thank my friends and colleagues for joining me, Michael Armitage from Nairobi, Phil Tinari from Beijing, Reem Fadda, usually from Abu Dhabi, but who's in New York right now, and Janse van Rensburg from Cape Town. So as we near the conclusion of day 3 of the Culture Summit Abu Dhabi, I wish to first of all thank all those at the Department of Culture and Tourism who have made the production and presentation of this ambitious virtual gathering possible. While we all miss being on Saadiyat, meeting with hundreds of participants from over 100 countries, this year's gathering has been a welcome jolt of connection. First with our summit partners, The Economist, Google, Design Museum, and UNESCO, among others, and with all of you, our global creative community. To DCT, we offer gratitude and congratulations. The themes that have emerged over the summit's wide-ranging topics, from architecture and sustainability to speculations on the post-COVID cultural economy, have all agreed on one thing. Arts institutions around the world have been impacted in historic proportion by the events of 2020. In the museum industry, we have been inspired and compelled to reimagine our role and agency in society, especially local society. Specifically, many have called on practitioners like all of us here to think of our personal and institutional mandate as being a catalyst for local community life and social development, even as we may serve a wider or even global public through our reach and influence. The intensity of change has been attributed to the global pandemic and its vortex of crises, and also to the social justice movement, which brought on a profound reckoning with systemic racism in our educational systems and cultural organizations, a condition we apparently share with the British monarchy. It's a time of seismic historical shifts, Andra Santo told us, and it really feels that way. But one area that has not been fully exercised in this forum and has a lot to do with this recalibration of the local is the generational shift at play in these larger socio-political and cultural rotations. All of you are working in cities with huge youth demographics. You run or are at the center of regional art worlds that are bursting with energy and unburdened by whatever canon has already been overthrown. You serve digital natives. So in your comments today, I would love you to help us understand the worldviews of this younger, globalized, but actively local generation, what we can expect them to believe in and fight for, and how they imagine what Ho Hanru calls the multiple futures of our planetary future. So I'm going to ask each of you to speak in this order. Michael will go first, Phil will go second, Reem will go third, and Storm will go fourth. And rather than kind of recite all of these amazing bios, I will do it one by one. So Michael, if you may, I'm going to introduce you first. Michael works between Nairobi and London, where from 2007 until 2010, he studied at the Slade School of Fine Art and the Royal Academy Schools. He calls his lush paintings parallel cultural histories, the tensions between the real and the surreal, the fantastic and the sinister. He merges the lineage of East African modernism and the vanguard with contemporary media depictions of Kenyan politics and society, entangling intimate memories with political reportage, the representation of African bodies, and the fraught relationship between Africa and the West. Over the last few years, Michael has participated in the 58th Venice Biennial and had solo exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary Art Sydney, the Haus der Kunst Munich, and the Museum of Modern Art New York in collaboration with the Studio Museum Haarlem, where I am pleased to say the Guggenheim lent an important painting. We are very interested in learning about the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute, a non-profit platform that Michael is developing with the director Ayako Bertoli. It is a new kind of regional focused platform for teaching and, I think, empowerment, focused on the dynamics between contemporary art making in East Africa and the mostly forgotten stories of artists of the historical, modern, and colonial era. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and thank you for having me be part of this panel. I'm just going to try share my screen, which hopefully works. Yeah, so I thought I'd start with a little bit on Nkai, as it's, we are yet to open our doors and have also been heavily affected by COVID to do with our programming like many others. But Nkai came about through some conversations that I'd had in the lead up to the first gathering, which was an event in 2017 where we had 52 artists and practitioners from 12 different countries from the African continent come together for 3 days. In the lead up to that, I was asking students and others and artists, gallerists, the whole lot in Nairobi, what are the sorts of things that we need to happen, and what are the kind of gaping holes that we have within the art world. And the one thing that, well, two things really that kept coming back were that we needed a not-for-profit art space, so something outside of the commercial system, and the other side was educational, so something with either a bachelor's or postgraduate degree. So that's kind of where things began, thinking about actually setting up a space in an institution. From that point, we began, talking with Ayako Bertoli, how Nkai would kind of evolve and the steps it would take. Our first step is to start a physical space, which was supposed to open last year in April, but due to the pandemic, we didn't open and couldn't open. Fortunately, we've just picked up the keys and we'll be moving into our space next week and hoping to open in a couple months. But just to give a kind of overview of what Nkai is about and the sort of things we're doing and have been doing over this last year when we haven't had a space but have had to think about what it is to serve a local community, both that of the artists, but also what we would consider a wider audience. So the people of Nairobi and more widely Kenya. A little bit on Nkai. So as we couldn't open a physical show, and I was lucky enough to be asked to do a show at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, which due to the pandemic and their programming shifts, they ended up with a lot more space than was initially offered. The potential for us to work together with Nkai and Haus der Kunst came up. So we decided to try and do a show that looked at the last, or a room as part of a bigger show, that looked at the last kind of 40 years in figurative painting through the eyes of 6 artists, to really try and follow the shifts, both in ideas, but also in language that have evolved in East Africa. So here's a little glimpse into the room. This room, first of all, at the Haus der Kunst is called Mwili Akili na Roho, and it will travel to the Royal Academy to open in a couple months, and then it'll be our second show in our physical space in Nairobi. Good on the opening. Alongside the show, we've been making a series of artists' films. These are 3 of the artists that were in Mwili Akili na Roho that we made films on. Again, thinking, as we don't have a space, what's the best way of telling the story of the artists? And most of the artists that we're showing either had, a sort of period, maybe 10 years in their career, where they were able to show, but more often than not, they haven't been shown. And different initiatives that they've started, for example, like Elimo and Jao starting Payapa, which was one of the cultural and artistic hubs in Nairobi. Payapa kind of came to a grinding halt in the late 90s when it had a fire, and they never had the funds to rebuild. So these films explore not only these three artists, but we'll have about 17 films at the end of within the next 6 months. Our first show that we'll have is on Sain Wadu, who's also one of the artists in Mulia Kilina Rojo, and it'll be the first retrospective of his work, hoping to open in 2 months, as I said. The Gathering is part of our off-site programs, and we recently did an online version, again, not being able to gather in person. We conducted a much smaller, sort of 20 panelists, and then students from all over Africa joined as a way of continuing in the spirit of the Gathering, but in these times. One of the things that we then decided is, we don't have a space and we have this community that we want to begin to work with and serve. One of the ways that we could do that is, seeing as health is currently at the forefront of everyone's minds, but also impacting the entire country, we wanted to try and raise funds to help with the health initiatives that are going. So through the charity Beyond Zero, our fundraising helps not only train nurses and set up different clinics all over the country and, kind of treating COVID, but in women's health, which is their normal programming. The other thing we thought is that it would be good to also support cultural activities in the city. And so through Ghetto Classics, which uses classical music in the slums in Nairobi to educate the children, they repurposed their network and started a feeding program. So the funds raised through a lithograph, Dream and Refuge, that I made, have all gone towards supporting them. Again, the lithograph was sold through White Cube, and very kindly, with the help of Gasworks, we were able to send the funds directly to those charities and also to Nkai, the Arts Institute. Another fundraiser was a series of jumpers that we did. And then finally is the building. We're kind of taking the step to open our space, which seems maybe a little bit crazy, given that we're all still under a variety of lockdowns. But we really feel it's important to start our program and start interacting beyond the virtual space within our local community first, and then slowly as the world opens up towards a wider international community. So our building that we have is about 4,000 square feet. It's obviously relatively modest in relation to the other institutes that will be presented here today. But this is where we're starting out. And then we have a vision for the future. And we've been working with David Ajay, who's very kindly put forward a proposed space that we would hope, sort of maybe 5 to 10 years time to kind of embark on, which has a permanent central space, which has two exhibition spaces, a library, and then all the other aspects of an institution to go with it. And then the second part is the educational institution, which would have a series of studios for a postgraduate program, and then a kind of auditorium, a flexible auditorium space. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are at the moment. I'll stop share. That's where we are at the moment, and although I would say there have been some significant setbacks and frustrations and real difficulties and problems with COVID, there have also been opportunities that have come up that would otherwise not be there. And I think that's also something that for us has been important, is that the opportunities that we have had to take more time to do certain aspects of institution building, in our case, have really been appreciated, and probably in the long run will provide a stronger foundation for the things that we have to do. But thanks, Alexandra.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We want to return to a lot of those thoughts, including the core reason and passion for your wanting to build this. I mean, you articulated it, but we want to come back. And let me know when you're taking applications, because I want to come. So it's my great delight to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Philip Tinari, who is Director and Chief Executive of UCCA Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing. Since joining in 2011, Phil has led UCCA's transformation into China's leading independent contemporary art institution, presenting a huge range of exhibitions and programs, both local and international, to an annual audience that he's built up of over 1 million visitors across multiple venues, now including UCCA Dune in Beidaihe and UCCA Edge in Shanghai that just opened last year. A widely published writer, Phil is founding editor of the magazine Leap, which was really the first bilingual magazine of contemporary Chinese art when it appeared in the mid-2000s, and is a contributor editor of Art Forum, having founded the Chinese and Beijing-based online version of Art Forum, which was really a catalyst, played an extremely important role in the emergence of what we now all call contemporary Chinese art. Phil was a curator with Ho Hanru and me of the 2017 Guggenheim exhibition, Art in China After 1989, Theater of the World, which was presented at the Guggenheim and traveled to SF MoMA and Guggenheim Bilbao, which Art News cited as one of the most influential shows globally of the last decade. Phil is curator of the upcoming first Oddity Biennale in Riyadh, and we are really excited to connect him further to the region through the summit. So Phil, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's great to be together with you and with everyone. I think actually everyone on this panel I saw in my last trip out of China before just as the pandemic was beginning, on different stops along the way, and it's hard to believe it's been a year, but it's also nice that we have these ways to reconnect. When I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, actually a rather taking the prompt quite literally of going local, I started to think about the history of UCCA, which was opened in late 2007, at probably the peak moment of China's globalization in the lead up to the Beijing Olympics, and was founded by a couple of Belgian collectors who had amassed a rather significant holding of contemporary Chinese art, as an institution that very much represented the internationalization of the Chinese contemporary art scene. And if I think about the work we've done over the past now almost 14 years, maybe we might see it, or we could argue for seeing it as a process of localization and a process of, holding onto this global inheritance, but digging in more and more deeply to the community and the communities in which we find ourselves. So I just wanted to trace that history through a couple of images that I pulled together. Starting with this one, which was the state of our main space, our Great Hall, we call it, in 2007, a socialist, high socialist factory subsidized by Soviets and designed by East Germans in the mid-50s. So, we also forget that there were other forms of globalization, before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And one way I like to trace our evolution is through the different facades we've presented to the outside world. And this was before my time in 2007, what UCCA looked like at the very beginning. And you'll notice that one enters a kind of, here it's very well lit, but on a normal day, it might be quite dark, a sort of tunnel. And then suddenly a revolving door would appear on one's left, and one would sweep through it and enter into this art space kind of absolutely unlike and quite disconnected from its larger environment. And honestly, if you didn't know what you were looking for, you might not know it was there. And the environment where we're headquartered, the 798 Art District at that time, was quite peripheral to the city and was still an area frequented by kind of art insiders. It's since become a major tourist destination and a cultural center in its own right. This was the sort of adolescent phase of UCCA from 2012, which is shortly after I arrived, until quite recently, until 2018. We were able to move the door to the front and kind of present ourselves in a slightly more welcoming way. And this was very much part of the project during those years of, building up new forms of support that did not involve a total reliance on our founders, but also, and more importantly, implementing things like a very active kids education program, a huge range of public programs, including films, talks, and performances, and an exhibition program that tried to center the Chinese art scene while also injecting it with kind of international connections and dialogues. And then in the more recent years, this is our Chinese New Year card from this year, but it gives a sense of kind of how things have evolved. It's kind of how it started, how it's going kind of moment. This is the current constellation. So in the middle, you see the transformed campus with, again, redesigned by OMA, with a transparent curvaceous glass facade and a gradient on the ground there that kind of goes from light to dark and meets up with the color of the floors inside and is attempting to really bring people in. But you also see on the left UCCA Dune, which is situated in a planned vacation community by the sea in Beidaihe, about 330 kilometers from Beijing, historically the sort of beach town that goes with the Chinese capital. A really dramatic building designed by a young Chinese architect called Li Hu and his firm Open Architecture, which unfolds like a series of caves buried under a sand dune that opens onto the Bohai Sea, where our exhibition program, very naturally for a place that's literally looking out at a rising sea, tends to focus on issues of climate, of the Anthropocene, of the natural. And then on the right, for something totally different, excuse the resemblance between this office building and Sanaa's new museum. This is actually the building in which UCCA Edge is housed, and it occupies the pedestal level, which you can see on 2, 3, and 4, that kind of juts out from either side, where we've worked with So the New York-based architecture firm, to basically transform ready-made, a sort of commercial ready-made of podium office building space into what we hope will be a wonderful home for our program in Shanghai, where we'll be able not only to share some exhibitions from Beijing, but also to develop all kinds of new programs. Actually, at the bottom right corner of this image, you also see the entrance to the subway, because it sits directly atop 2 lines in an area of a Jing'an district in Shanghai that's being rapidly revitalized. And unlike either of its colleagues to the left, it is completely imbricated in the urban fabric and part of the city. And we're very much looking forward. We actually will open on May 1st in Shanghai, to connecting directly with an urban public. So, of course, this past year has unfolded dramatically, but quite differently in China. We closed our doors on January 19th, 2020, to welcome the Chinese New Year. We didn't reopen until May 21st, so we were shut down for 4 months, which by global terms is rather short, but it sort of happened before it happened anywhere else, and so it was quite upsetting. And one of the first things we sort of had to teach ourselves to do, as many have since, was to move programming online. And this is just one example, and for us, really the transformational example of what it meant to stage these concerts, which were connected to an exhibition called Sonic Garden that we had up at the moment, Voluntary Garden rather, to different forms of experimental sound and musicians. And what was really interesting, you see this date of February 29th, when China was still in full lockdown, and when the symptoms of the disease and the course of its later spread were not as well known. to create this kind of singular moment of online togetherness among people really spread among their houses. We had, I think, something like 200,000 visitors, viewers for this. Ryuichi Sakamoto very famously came, sort of headlined the performance and ended using a symbol that was emblazoned "Made in Wuhan." And it really kind of was this kind of cathartic moment for the Chinese art community, but again, like quite a teachable moment for us in terms of what it would mean to see ourselves not only physically among our community, but with them on this other level as well. Something that we've continued even as we've come back into the physical world, which we did when we reopened on May 21st with this exhibition called "Meditations in an Emergency," a small Frank O'Hara homage, but also kind of the way we felt about the world around us at that moment. And it's quite interesting because as a very young institution, as many have noted as well, we're always trying to get ourselves closer and closer to what we've perceived as this international standard. Working on an exhibition with Alexandra at the Guggenheim, one learns about timelines of preparation that stretch 3 and 5 years, where in China, until not so long ago, 3 and 5 months was kind of a more normal way of doing things. And we've gotten well beyond that. And we're looking, of course, into 2024 and 25 with our program now. But it was quite interesting that when push really came to shove and we were closed for this period, that we were still flexible enough to be able to sit the curators in a room and with a few days of concentrated thinking and a few weeks of concentrated emailing and Zooming, come up with a 28 artist show in 5 sections, looking at different aspects of life in the age of COVID. And this is just one work by the painter Zhang Hui. These were made well before the pandemic, of people in roles like nurses in hospitals or flight attendants, but that kind of resonated certainly with our new reality. Or something like this piece of Zhang Pei Li, based on a 3D scan of all of his bones, then rendered in marble in Carrara. Or this piece by the young artist Payne Zhu, which was these 2 parallel investigations of kind of spiraling algorithmic, searching of terms related to the pandemic, very much evoking this mode of our search for understanding in this moment of total confusion. And it's kind of interesting because some of these words were blacked out by him, and others were blacked out kind of as we moved to open the show and ran up against the limits of the system in which we have since the very beginning worked and functioned. For us, it's become more and more and more about the visitors and what we can do for them, and how, even as we interact more and more online, we can use our physical presence and our exhibitions to give them new ideas and help them reevaluate their lives. And you see this quite young audience visiting a show late last year called Immaterial, Rematerial, A Brief History of Computing Art, which looked at all kinds of alternative histories of the digital, going back to the 60s, actually. Artists working with algorithms long before it was something that was considered mainstream. I think in a context of a China that's been rising for so long, and that's kind of constantly renegotiating its place in the global order, I spend and have spent a lot of time thinking about what that means on the level of everyday subjectivity, and how art can be a way for individuals to re-encounter and re-envision their place in relation to this world, maybe not necessarily through the more straightforward prism of a nation state ideology, but rather through a kind of constellation of positions and ideas that make sense to who they are at a given moment. We also try to offset. China is, with notable exceptions, is not wired in a multicultural, multi-ethnic way, let's say. And yet there are divisions of class and of income, and of geography and of education. And our UCCA Foundation tries very hard to, to sort of offset what we do in this elite level of presenting exhibitions of Picasso or of Xu Bing or major Chinese international artists, with really heartfelt outreach to places in Beijing and in China more broadly. This is in in rural Yunnan, where we have a number of ongoing interventions in schools there that involve the creation of kind of arts classrooms based on exhibitions and curricula we've developed around them kind of for our UCA kids that then get through collaborations with people like the China Red Cross Foundation put into communities that otherwise would really have no connection to contemporary art. And this is something that we find increasingly urgent and meaningful, and that we plan to do much more of as we continue to grow into further cities around China. Yeah, it's another image of the kinds of things that our foundation team does on their travels. But I think another way in which we connect with the local is actually through the cultivation of a world-class staff. This is just a piece of our staff. We as we were preparing to reopen, we were starting to install this Meditations in an Emergency show, and we discovered this site-specific mural by Yen Peiming that was hidden behind walls and layers of drywall from 10 years earlier. But I look around at our team, and I just think, here are the people who are really going to lead the contemporary art institution, the museum field in China through the 21st century. And, it's so much of my job these days is about creating an equitable, empowering, inspiring environment in which, all these amazingly talented individuals can bring what they have to the table in a way that's open and equal and generative. By the way, so we're in one of these moments of regeneration right now. We just went through a sort of, it wasn't a COVID shutdown, but we were closed for about a month around the time of the Chinese New Year as we reset our program, and we're getting back into a more normal rhythm. So we opened a show on Friday called Silent Thunder, which is actually a little bit inspired by a show that Alexandra curated in 2009 called The Third Mind. It's actually looking at 4 Chinese artists and their complex relationships to Buddhist discourses of different kinds, and the role that kind of interpretation and mistranslation has played in the forging of those relationships. We also opened an exhibition called Space Oddity, a nice little David Bowie reference for everyone, at June, which is 12 artists and groups, everyone from Anton Vidokle to a very young Chinese artist called Chen Xin, looking really at this idea of planetary consciousness, inspired really by the curator's initial idea that this space, when you get inside, actually feels a bit like a planetarium. Views, galleries with views on the beach. It's a nice thing to have. But more maybe most. I'll end here because this is the exhibition that they're putting the finishing touches on this evening, and that opens to the public tomorrow. And this is the state, 4 or 5 days ago, so it's much more finished at this point. But this is a mid-career retrospective of the artist Cao Fei, who people may know. She's a very widely exhibited Chinese artist of her generation, born in 1978, has figured prominently at the Guggenheim and MoMA and many other places. But amazingly, and this is because of China's particular situation, she hasn't ever had a proper institutional show in her home country. So really, it's been such, it's how do you become urgent? And sometimes it's by doing the most obvious thing, but doing it really to the most dramatic possible level. So this exhibition is really an environment that contains 25 years of her output and puts it into all kinds of new juxtapositions and connections. I consider it an immersive experience and really a work in itself. You see at the front her Hongxia Theater, which is a body of work people may know from an exhibition at the Serpentine last year, but all kinds of other projects that really track the development of China and the different moments of its economic emergence and cultural transformation over the last few decades, kind of suddenly thrown together. And I really look forward to presenting an exhibition like this. There's some words to live by: my city is yours, your city is mine, talking about R&B City, her virtual platform and Second Life from the mid-2000s. Hopefully through this exhibition, the few 100,000 people who come to see it will have a chance to question and re-envision and reimagine their relationship to their time and to this place. And to me, that's, being local is sometimes also a way of being transcendent. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. A very, very exhilarating romp through this extraordinary history. And again, I think we're all so grateful to you for leading UCCA during these transformational times, as you say, for the global rise of China, but also, as you remind us, more importantly, the internal rise of a kind of cultural consciousness and its own sense of urgency among a younger generation of Chinese. So thank you, and congratulations on the Chow Fei show. Next, I'm so pleased to introduce my very dear and esteemed colleague, curator and art historian, Reem Fadda. From 2010 to 2016, Reem worked with us at the Guggenheim Museum, developing the vision, strategy, and implementation of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi's transcultural collection and program. And it is really her research, her rigor, her intellectual framing that directed the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi to be deeply, deeply grounded in the local, in its collection and in its future program around the concept of Wanasa, West Asia, North Africa, and South Asia, which is sort of an expanded idea of the local from the vantage of Abu Dhabi. She is now curator for the Department of Culture and Tourism, Abu Dhabi, while serving as director of the Cultural Foundation, the Emirates' first multi-purpose arts and community center, which opened in 1981 and is a beloved symbol of culture in the Emirate and beyond. Over the last 2 decades, Reem has shaped the Palestinian art world. From 2005 to 2007, she was director of the Palestinian Association for Contemporary Art in Ramallah and served as academic director for the International Academy of Art Palestine, which she helped to found in 2006. She's curated several international exhibitions and biennials, including Sharjah Biennial 13, the 6th Marrakesh Biennial, which was very critically acclaimed, and the United Arab Emirates National Pavilion at the 55th Venice Biennial. Reem was awarded the 8th Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement in 2017 and received a Fulbright scholarship way back when to pursue her PhD in the Department of History of Art and Visual Studies at Cornell. And we're hoping one of these days, Reem, you can finish that PhD. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. And thank you, everyone, for being with us on this panel. As also one of the co-organizers of this Culture Summit, alongside Alexandra and the Guggenheim, I'm feeling really exhilarated at all these fantastic panels and discussions that have been happening. And I've been avidly following them from New York time at 4 a.m. And I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. I wanted to really focus my little contribution here in this panel and to interrogate the question that was posited on, reframing our institutions and thinking about how we perceive the local. And I wanted to look at it from the vantage point of the Culture Foundation, specifically through, I want to say some abstract notions, but at the same time to imagine alongside all of you, what are they and what are the priorities that we as an institution in Abu Dhabi, how are we reformulating ourselves? And how are we rethinking our processes, moving onwards and reflecting on our own past and some of the really kind of integral things to our society there. Usually, if I was presenting to a person within us, with us in the building there, I would be telling you about the 3 pillars of exhibitions, performing arts, and the children's library. But I thought, given this panel, I can reformulate that structure and think of new pillars of importance. And starting with the first one, which I think is quite important for us, which is that we are an institution of care. And it's lovely, Philip, how you also, you ended on reflecting on the staff and how they are an integral part of you. But with the pandemic, we really had to think about the staff first, right? So it was our community and our definitions of community that came first in the aspect of our, revisiting our institutions, this lockdown that was happening. How do we, Abu Dhabi is no exception to the world, budget cuts were there, how do you think of retaining your own community first, and at the same time, serving your outer community? So as an institution of care, we really had to think about these priorities and reformulate our strategies alongside them. And think together about what does that mean in terms of emergency situations, how do we operate? Their safety comes first. The entire kind of, I want to say, philosophy in Abu Dhabi was our community comes first. And this is something that was quite incredible to see. And it has been, I would say, unparalleled to all the places that I've been in conversation with in the world. So that society, that community that really is at the front and center and at the heart of where our aspirations are for. And back to your point, Alexandra, my institution, the Culture Foundation, and alongside other institutions in the Department of Culture and Tourism, we really employ a big sector of youth. So that is already immediately a part of the makeup of our institutions. And it's part of the DNA of these institutions. What do they want? We took the opportunity through this period to do experimentation, to think about, reformulations of our strategies, where we could go in, like we did retreats outside to really kind of reformulate our ideas. And that brings me to my following pillar, which I think is quite important, is that the second pillar that is quite important is the institution of now. And we really, I really have long, looked at the philosophy of how important it is for us to constantly live in the now and not live in a modernistic, let's say, legacy of always aspiring to a future that we never attain, right? Because we never live in the moment. And this pandemic has really given us a moment for our time, to own our time and to think of our time and to feel our time. So I think with that, with this kind of emphasis, we were able to also reflect on, our priorities, our artist community. And this is something that, thankfully we are a government-supported institution, but again, we have to think about how do we reformulate our priorities to support our artists, our industries. These were some things of us that were really kind of pertinent for the moment and for the time being. And this is something that we advanced. So thinking about ways of where our cultural industries, our creative industries, our various artists, we had to reroute the funding and make sure that we persist in order to maintain their livelihood and our built infrastructure and community. So these were some of the really kind of rigorous ways. And I'm involved in also levels of thinking on policy and strategy within DCT's culture sector in advancing these ideas. So the institution was just one in various ways to reflect that. And that persistence became a political act, right? So, and thinking about the now demanded digitization. and it demanded it. Our communities demanded digitization. Our communities were hungry. They wanted our support. You know, the children needed an outlet. The families required to see something. Youth required to hear music. And we wanted to oblige. And we were not, and at that point in time, our local was always of interest, but now we've suddenly found ourselves exploding onto a larger scene in a regional and even global framework. So the outreach through our digital front was quite vast and really quite important. And I'll come to that in a little while. The important thing as well that we have to be cognizant of is, you know, we were asked to socially distance, and we closed our building for a good also nearly 4 months, from March until end of July. But we became, by being socially distant, we became even more cognizant of our need for our society and our community. And I know we opened also for, we were speaking earlier and Storm mentioned that, you know, we only get like 10% of our audience. And that's true, even our building now, though we opened it for our public with our exhibitions, with everything. And the structure of the building is quite unique because it's free, so it's not ticketed. We don't demand that. And that's a publicness that we serve and we are very proud of. And at the same time, we have like 4 open doors. So it's like a big arena that is a building that is open up. It's not a closed structure in any means or form. And at the same time, it's in the heart of the city. It's in Al Husn, which is absolutely the heart of where Abu Dhabi's city was built up. So it's a very communal area. So this kind of momentum for us meant that we could always allow for a safe environment for our audiences to be there with us in that moment, in the now. And that was something that we wanted to allow for. You know, we did, you know, it's not a priority about, let's say, tourism or reaching numbers, but it's more about a responsibility to provide a safe haven for our audiences, knowing that the numbers were being achieved on the digital frontier. And this is something that, you know, calibrated some of our programs, which brings me also to the third point, which is we think of this institution as an institution of equity. And that's something that, you know, it's really important for us to think along those terms about how are we being able to provide for these audiences, for all kinds of audiences. Abu Dhabi is a host to many nationalities in the world, and especially a lot from the Pan-Asian continent. So this is a place for everyone to be able to come in, families to come in, and they are able to also draw in a safe zone, that area and that place of, let's say, experiencing culture. We have a children's library that has been quite an active front, and this is something from the legacy of the institution that has transformed from being a community institution to an arts institution. But I think the community part is always, you know, it's something we embrace, and it's something that is really important for it. And the children's library is quite advanced in its, both in its appearance, in the way that the book collections that it displays, from the knowledge that it also gives forward, and the workshops that it provides. And it was one of the most active spaces, as cultural institutions are, in Abu Dhabi. It used to receive around 1,000 visitors a day on average. I mean, this is something that we are very proud of. And again, it's an institution that is free for the families, and quite advanced with a lot of its ideas. And, you know, this is something that we made sure to open the library, at least in the minimum way forward, which is to provide for lending services. And we then thought about, again, now moving to the 4th pillar, which is the institution of knowledge. How do we then provide this knowledge base on all levels of our work at the Culture Foundation to the widest range of audiences possible. It brings me back again to this, to anchoring ourselves on digitization. And we really thought of, the Children's Library, for example, immediately created an online library through resources like Scholastic Publishing and others. That we rerouted our funds to paying those, these fantastic publishing online resources, and created an online library that if you're in New York and you wanted to register on the library for your children, it's for free. So basically, instead of you paying the fees to any of these publishing houses, we collated them, and now we created a resource that is impeccable, and it's online, and it's available for all children and families and schools, and it's available for free. And then we created a small filming unit within the library where our staff safely was able to come and draw out and create workshops for the children. We're proud to say one session we did with the Ministry of Culture had 10,000 children in it in one day. So we've been achieving the numbers, and we've been there for our community on in quite, I want to say, a really kind of shaped form. Again, I want to emphasize that it's very important for us to persevere, right? To continue to, our young curators to work on the research, to advance the thinking for exhibitions. And we've done that. And we're about to open a fantastic loan exhibition now, actually, that is coming to Abu Dhabi end of the month, opening on the 29th of March on Muhammad Shaba and the Casablanca School in our main hall. And we had previously opened also Abdurrahim Salim during the pandemic. So we didn't stop making the exhibitions live on the ground, despite the low numbers. But that's not about it, because we were able to digitize these exhibitions. We're able to create the publications about these exhibitions. And this in itself is an act that we wanted to make sure we're persevering with it. And then, the online experience of the exhibition is a new one. I mean, we're here, yes, it does not, and for any reason, it would not substitute the live experience, but it is an experience. And we cannot dismiss it at this point in time. And I mentioned that we really thought of our artists. So, and our artist community is a vital point for us. This has always been the house of artists in Abu Dhabi, the house of the creative community. We have beautiful art studio spaces. Our art residency program has thrived even on a virtual format. The artists have been safely able to go to their studios, but we've been able to even expand the program by doing online crits, exposing them to the kind of largest kind of format, marketing them to our local audiences, really starting to draw the interest on who they are and making them as visible as possible. And at the same time, we decided that we wanted to reroute some of our funding and go with open calls. So we started doing open calls to support artists in the various fields that we are generating. One other thing I wanted to mention is that we've created some fantastic programs, and I'll end with that, of performances that have been online rigorously so across the pandemic. And I remember receiving messages from people all across the region, friends from everywhere that were able to log in and watch these live performances, artists the performers that have missed so much reaching out to these audiences. But when you give them their access to their own bread and butter, to be able to do what they love doing best, and to encourage them and to support them anywhere in the world, for them to be from their living room or on our stage, we were able to do that and support that larger sector. And people would message me and tell me, this is amazing. We feel, this is very inspiring. And this is truly something that becomes a legacy for the institution. What you see now in the Culture Summit, Abu Dhabi, is a group of fantastic artists that we've produced performances for in the later part of the program. Every evening we close with a number of performances, and mostly from the African continent. They specifically curated as such, and we're ending tonight with a live premiere by Ghalia bin Ali, and it's going to be quite a spectacular performance. So I end with that.
It's just congratulations on this perseverance and the creativity and lessons that you've learned. It's really deeply moving. I loved your story of 10,000 children tuning in. It's just fantastic and reminds us that one of the great lessons that we've learned by urgency is the validity of the digital space and the potential creativity that it has, both for local, but also for huge reach. And what Michael said in one of the other talks we had, the kind of equity that's structurally built into the digital. It is free and it is available, and you're not a second-class citizen by not being live. So I think that is something that has really been fundamentally transformational during this time. So over to Storm. I'm aware that we only have 20 minutes left. So, and I do want time for discussion, I hope. But Storm, over to you. We're looking forward to hearing about Zeitz. And let me just give a brief introduction. Storm Janse van Rensburg is a curator of contemporary art who has worked in South African and international context for the past 25 years and is now senior curator at Zeitz MoCA in Cape Town, which has emerged really very quickly as one of the most important new centers of contemporary art on the continent. And we want to hear more about the work that he's developing there with his team and wonderful director Koyo in the context of South Africa. Storm has lived and worked in Johannesburg, Berlin, and the US, where he headed the exhibitions at the Savannah College of Art and Art and Design Museum of Art, staging some incredibly important shows, and is also very well regarded, and is how I've known him through his writings and works that he's edited, including for the African Arts Journal, Art South Africa, Metropolis M, Canvas, and Contemporary and Magazine, among others, and was the editor of the celebrated monograph Jacob Lawrence, Lines of Influence, which I have to say was maybe the best show I saw in 2020. So Storm, over to you. And let's just keep a little mindful of time, so hopefully we can leave some room for discussion.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and thank you to esteemed panelists and everybody tuning in. I'll be as quick as I can. And just to say that Zeitz MoCA, as many of you know, is a nascent institution. We're very young. We opened our doors in 2017, and under the leadership of Koyo, who just under 2 years ago arrived to lead the institution, have established a series of interventions and engagements to reposition the museum, but ultimately also through a series of critical acts, really interrogate and think around what a museum should be for this context and on the continent, but also kind of how do we create a responsive institution, and what are the values that we espouse. So a kind of initial kind of vision was articulated through a focus on largely on monographic exhibitions, a way for us to kind of also think about the writing of our art history on the continent through the vision and voices of individual artists in nuanced and complex ways. But of course, the challenges posed by the pandemic and COVID-19 has really kind of like made us also think about kind of a series of very quick, relatively quick moving actions and thinking through what our program is and exhibitions to also probe how we establish and how we make institutions. And of course, like many international institutions also, it has forced us to really reconnect and kind of establish a very strong relationship to the local. And I want to prod that the local then through a couple of examples at the moment that is in the museum. Of course, what has happened in the beginning part of lockdown last year, for 8 months, the museum was closed. We also had to really think about what a museum is without a building, who our audiences are, where we place up our programming, what ultimately almost a kind of a question of thinking about the prime, kind of the core aspects of what museums and institutions like ourselves do. We initiated a program last year called which is a studio process, the Atelier, where we invite young contemporary artists into the space for a period of up to between 4 and 6 months, a way for the making of contemporary art to also be demystified, and also kind of make a connection to audiences between the making, the studio process, and also our audiences. Currently, we have in residence a young artist called Haroon Gansali, a Cape Town-based artist who's also an activist, and has been working for the last 10 years, really probing a South African history and also how it relates to our colonial past, but also the larger kind of like narratives and impact of a global corporate, if you can call it that, impact on local communities. But it also is an opportunity for us to reflect back onto the institution itself, and also see this as a way for us as an institution to invite artists into the fold, so to speak, to also reflect on the way that we work. On the left of this image, a work called No Sugar, a site-specific work really where he collected cups from the canteen, the staff canteen, which is housed in the museum, where cups that is used in kind of office spaces upstairs kind of migrate itself way for use by staff and workers, kind of out of the more public part into kind of aspects where kind of workers would access and use these cups, a kind of a way for us to also think in unthinking and kind of unintentional ways how value systems operate even within institutions. On the right-hand side, an image of the studio itself, a work called Justice, which commemorates the 2012 Marikana massacre, a way for us also to really think about and remind us about the atrocities in the recent past. How do we think about the local in regards to the larger global world? Last year, we also kind of set out into a process of reaching out to others, through gestures of solidarity, to engage with makers, with institutions, in conversations, to kind of check in, to ask, to share, and understand kind of like the way that we need to rethink our roles as institutions and cultural workers in how we connect. And so the Radical Solidarity Summit ultimately came out of almost 7 months of engagements and talks and talking with others, into a thematic conversation where we spoke about the historic context of Pan-Africanism and the transnational struggle, amongst the way also that publishing and new forms of transmission of knowledge kind of impact on the work that we do, thinking about mobility and borders and how that impacts the work on the continent, and also on collectivity and collaboration as radical practice. And some of the most extraordinary minds of the continent and its diaspora joined us over a week-long process. But here's also the place, I think, that during the initial lockdown period, where certain kind of proximities kind of like collapsed, we became closer to many of those that are actually far away. And it's also kind of like thinking about social distancing, how certain intimacies was denied. But this paradox is I think, something that we have constantly kind of grappled with. We reopened the museum in October last year, after 8 months of closure. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, what is a museum without people? It's not a very pleasant place. How do we invite back an audience into the space, into a different way? How do we also collapse those barriers that exist potentially for participation and equal participation into the museum? And a relatively short period, just under 5 weeks period, we sent out an invitation to all Cape Townians to bring their artwork to the museum in a project called Home is Where the Art Is. It was a completely open invitation, meaning that any person that owned an artwork or that made an artwork could bring it in. We launched an extensive social media campaign. It was really kind of extremely well taken up on. We were completely overwhelmed by the response. We also not only collected artworks at the museum itself, but also 5 other centers in the larger metropolitan area, also thinking about access. And I think that's something that we, in a South African context, understand very well, is that we have different audiences and different kind of challenges that many of our communities have in accessing the work that we're doing. and how do we kind of like remove those barriers. But a complete full-on staff initiative. Every single person at the museum got involved. We sent groups to various centers across the city to collect artworks, and had really an extraordinary response. People queuing outside the museum and these collection points up to 2.5 hours to bring their artwork in. And incredible response with over 1,600 artists bringing work to the museum. We had practically no selection criteria. We thought it's important to bring almost everything that we could fit through the doors into museum, and also kind of really, as a curator, of course, I've been working for many years, also suspended my own and all of our kind of like preconceived notions of what is important and what is not, and that every artist were treated, and that was the prompt to say every artist coming into the building will be treated like William Kentridge. And to kind of like also think about this for a moment, about the decision that is made about that object that would travel from home into the museum, and kind of like the narratives that are attached to it. The exhibition opened in October, at the end of October last year. We've extended it right through. It will run for an entire year to also give us an opportunity to kind of delve into the narratives. The exhibition was installed in just under just exactly a week, actually. We arranged the exhibition into 5 themes that we thought made sense. First one was the garden. Then we also kind of went into the outside space. We then kind of moved to the inside, an image like this, and into a kind of a series of a series that we called relations, where we kind of tried to also kind of make connections between what was brought in and the narratives that was shared. Social media engagement has been absolutely extraordinary. This way of also seeing yourself in the museum with artworks, and coupled with that, we've also embarked on a series of short documentaries and interviews with participants in the exhibition to tell their kind of individual narratives about the artwork that they brought into the museum, the experiences of, and actually quite interestingly, and that was not a prompt at all, but what this process of lockdown actually meant for many of these artists, and that works that were produced and made in that period actually found its way into the organization and into the museum walls. I think for us it was also a way to radically rethink the kind of way that we operate as a museum and institution, that local participation is not only it's a way for us to actually kind of like critically and actively kind of rethink that role, and kind of create that participation that often has been lacking. I want to put this in context, of course, of work from the Center for Art Education that is at the heart of our organization. The Center for Art Education before lockdown last year had over 15,000 individuals a year participating in all kinds of programs, whether it's children's tours of the museum, after school programs, teacher training to adult training. And so a large part of that work, of course, like most museums, we pivoted online and kind of like really kind of made those resources, as with Reem's program, is available online to kind of also lower the barriers for access. But also kind of like what's continuing on the side is a series of workshops, engagement with for teachers specifically, kind of teacher support, an environment where government support for our teachers are kind of very limited, and kind of actually be able to bolster that, to kind of very specific school visit programs. Of course, it's been more complicated with COVID regulations, also to bring large groups into the museum, but that's a program that is continuously happening as well. And again, just to say that we've placed these programs as within a large exhibition program. Like many institutions, so much of our work has migrated online. There's certain acceleration, of course, has happened in that aspect. But with how the kind of like drive towards like the online view, the online exhibition formats, while it's really been great for some of our discursive programming, we do believe that the engagement with art objects in museums, in the museum context, is ultimately can't be replaced, and it's something that we will continue to explore, and that we also kind of at the same time really kind of like understand museums as places of gathering, of getting together, and that we can do this also. Then that the work that is being doing here, that we have the responsibility with the time that we've been given to reinterrogate kind of our relationship to the local as something that will definitely shape our vision in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Storm, and really thank all of you for responding to these queries of the local so specifically and so robustly and really deeply inspiring. We have 5 minutes left, and I thought I would return to Michael and come back to, the other sort of part of my question, which had occurred to me over the last few days, which is about a generational shift. So if we could take everything that we've learned and taken these, radical new forms of engagement with local communities, both online through social media. Storm, that project with local artists is extraordinary, because I think one of the other things that we've been asked to think about as certainly museum practitioners is how not only to serve the local community better and more, but actually how to co-produce meaning and content and programs with our local community, including artists. But Michael, sort of back to you, how will the worldview of younger generation, and I include you in that younger generation, shape the way institutions engage with the local? What is the contribution? What is the worldview? What is the DNA? What is the radical contribution of this generation, also having lived through the pandemic at a younger age, at a younger stage of their lives and shaping their worldviews? What are we going to take away? How is that worldview going to shape the future of our institutions?
It's a hell of a question.
That's a hell of a question.
I wish I could answer that succinctly. But one of the issues that we have here, thinking about it from an art perspective, and particularly from art in serving a community, is that art was taken off the local syllabus for government schools. So the younger generation don't do art or have any contact with art throughout their entire education. And not only that, part of the reason that we set up Untitled was that there was nowhere in the city where you could see the work of older generations. And a lot of the students I spoke to in the run-up to the gathering if I asked them any of the artists who had shown before 2005 in Nairobi, none of them knew any of their work or any of their art. So, with us, we're starting at a slightly different place where we really need to do some of the basic groundwork. And it's so exciting to see how important a part education is to institutions, because that certainly is one of the things that we feel will be at the heart of what we're doing, and will also be the success of what we're doing is simply to introduce a new generation to art. And one of the things that does really, or is accelerated by this time, is how online presence has been kind of normalized even more. And I would say maybe for a younger generation, that's already been the case. And it's just a matter of other larger forms and institutions catching up with the way a younger generation is already thinking and operating. But to me, I think one of the exciting things is that after this, I would imagine people will be longing to be together, to share a space together, to see things in person. And, what exactly that will mean for the way things develop, I'm certainly not in a position to be able to say that with any authority, but I'm very excited, and excited for a younger generation. All of the people that will work at Untitled, I'm the oldest person as part of Untitled, so we're a young kind of institution in every sense, and hopefully we go forward with making all the right sort of errors, that a young institution can.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, I think that we are concluding this session, Making the Local. I really want to thank all of you for your robust and stimulating and, again, exhilarating presentations, which just make me want to come and visit all of your spaces. But really, thank you for giving us a lot to think about. And with that, I hope you will join the closing panel, which is coming up very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.